In this video, we're going to look at an HTML page that has a SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics element that is empty, and then it will be populated using JavaScript with design that is sort of inspired by what you see here, Victor Vasarely's CTA. Now, he's got a number of CTAs. I made another video that was based on a different version of Vasarely's CTA. This one's CTA 105 OR, apparently. It's this array, two-dimensional array of squares, and some of them are sort of rotated and are sort of like a diamond shaped, and then the ones in the center are sort of not rotated, sort of flat on squares. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to have, you see mine, the outer edge is going to be square and the inner is going to be diamond shaped, but also that it is, that angle that it's rotated is sort of sloshing back and forth. So there are points which it's not rotated at all, and then it will rotate. And I also have the sort of, this is sort of like a single hue. This one seemed to have some different hues. This one's all the same hue. The hue evolves in time, but for a given instant, there's it's all one hue, but there's a variation a little bit in the saturation between the background and the squares, and then within the squares, the lightness varies. Okay, so that's what we want to make. And let's see what we've got here. So HTML page, head, title, style, things are centered. I am defining a variable in the style called half size, and I'm using that. I'm using var and calc to style the SVG element at sort of a full size, twice the half size for both the width and height. And then I put a border around it, in this case, that's not what I wanted. Live server. I just put a border around it so I could see it. Okay. Here is the SVG element, as you can see, empty, and all the rest is script, so it's all populated by script. I have the number of sort of units within. I am going to be using a timer, a set interval, and so I'm going to remember the ID, so that's timer ID. I have some hue, and that's going to evolve in time, so H is my hue variable, T is my time variable. I have an angular frequency, so that's my W or omega of 0.75. That's how related to how fast or how frequently it will sort of rotate back and forth between those angles. I'm doing a lot with pi here, so I grabbed pi sort of once from the math library, made it a variable. This could have been constant, that could have been constant. And I have two colors. They're actually almost the same color. I mean, the color varies. The color can't be constant. I'm varying the lightness for sure, sometimes the saturation. But the reason for two colors is I have a fill and a stroke. So I've made the stroke just a slightly darker version of the same color. Okay. This work here, 45, 46, we're getting from the style, that half size variable, so then we can also use it in JavaScript. And then here I'm finding out the size of a cell. So I'm taking 2m, the full size, dividing it by num, and that tells me the sort of the side of my units. Here I'm using set interval to call a function called CTA. Every, it says here 50, it's actually clearly 100, every 100 milliseconds. And I'm assigning it to the timer ID. purpose of the timer ID is so that I can stop the timer. Once I get it going correctly, I don't stop the timer, so I don't really need to save it, but I'm just in the habit of always getting it. And here you can see commented out that I was stopping the timer in the function called by the timer. And this is sort of what I will use in debugging to sort of stop the timer and be able to sort of look at the console, see anything I might have printed to the console or any error messages in the console, without it continuing on and generating more and more errors or more and more output. Okay. So now here's my function CTA. I am incrementing the time. I am evolving the hue. The hue is an angle in degrees. So that's why the sort of modulus 360 here. I am clearing out any old contents that I might have had. I also sort of often put a great big square in there. And sort of visually, these two things, so I'm putting in this square, so I would cover up any old stuff. So it might seem at first like I don't need to clear it out, but you just need to get rid of all of those old things so you just don't have too many elements that the page needs to keep track of. Here is, this is the color first of the big rectangle, which is sort of the background. I am making it the color. I have a pretty low saturation of 30 and then a lightness of 50. And it starts at 0, 0, goes to full width and the full height is the color, and I'm adding it. So that is the sort of background that you see. And now I have my nested loop. So that's going to make my two-dimensional array. I'm looping over columns. I'm looping over rows. I have an angle I'm calling theta. Have like theta 1, theta 2, theta 3. I use theta 2 and theta 3 and use them differently, but theta 1 is just a stepping stone. Probably didn't need to make it a separate variable, but here it's inside the first loop, and so I am making an angle theta that depends on the column. And then I have my inner loop over rows, and I'm taking my theta, which depends on column, and I am also making it depend on row. And these were both sines. And so sine, and the sine column goes almost up, column goes up to sort of num. So I'm starting at 0, sine of 0, 0, and then I get all the way up to something close to pi, and sine of pi is 1. And so my angle is sort of varying. My pi, it's pi on fourth, which is sort of like a 45, and then I'm sort of going, and then that's multiplied by sine of this column thing. So that's why these two are pretty much almost exactly, not exactly, but pretty close to fixed because they're multiplied by a sine of 0. And then the other ones are, and then the other ones sort of rotate more. Then I am doing the same thing row-wise. So, and then if I wanted to make, so again, this design I'm showing you, he's got the rotation on the outer edges and the sort of straight on in the middle, and I'm sort of doing the opposite. But if I switch these sines to cosines, then I would get that effect of the sort of tilting on the edges and straight on in the middle. Okay. I'm establishing my color. So it's the same colors, the same hue as the background. I've upped the saturation, so these are sort of like more saturated, more fully colored. So the background is a little grayer, muted, and then the rectangles I'm going to make are a little bit brighter. And then I have the darkness varying with theta 2, and that theta 2 again varied with row and column. And so that's why it's sort of very dark on the edges and much lighter in the middle. Okay. And then I have sort of just two versions, just different by their lightness, and one is for the stroke. So I have that sort of darker border around it, that stroke around it. I have one more variation in my angle, and that is with time. So that's why it's sort of rotating back and forth in time. Okay. I'm finding a position based on my column and my row. Now, in a previous video, I had squares that were like rotated, and I would make the rectangle and then rotate it. Here, instead, what I'm doing is just figuring out the math of the positions and making a polygon. So there are, more than one way to get these things done. So I'm making a polygon. The polygon, one of the main attributes of a polygon is the set of points. I am getting a cosine and sine based on my angle, which is dependent on row, dependent on column, dependent on time. And I'm getting a cosine and a sine, and I call it C and S and then I am taking my position X and I'm sort of adding a cosine and a sine, subtracting a sine and adding a cosine, and all these variations, subtracting a cosine, subtracting a sine, adding a sine, subtracting a cosine. And that's just getting me the points sort of around the center XY that form a square, and that square may be rotated. And then I'm doing the points and doing the fill and doing the stroke and adding it. And then here I am now at the bottom. So that's what I wanted to show you. More play with these Victor Vasarely designs, playing with SVG and making this, in this case, this design that rotates, that has sort of a diagonal grid or a square grid, and it's sort of rotating back and forth, and the color varies and the lightness varies and so on. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you with this one. Thanks for your attention.